Hello, anatomy. Welcome to our video lecture for Chapter 3, Cells and Tissues. You might notice that the first section of Chapter 3 is on the parts of the cell, things like the phases of mitosis. That first part of Chapter 3, we're actually going to skip. You did all that in freshman bio, and I don't really feel the need to go through it again now. We're going to skip ahead to the section or the part of Chapter 3 on tissues and go through the 4 different types of tissues. Some of those can get pretty dense, so just go through them one at a time. So bear with me here. So first off, a tissue by definition is a group of cells that have a similar structure and a similar function. There are 4 main tissue types in humans. They are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. We're going to go through all 4 in this video. Muscle tissue and nervous tissue, we're going to talk about your muscles and your nerves in later chapters. We're just going to briefly talk about those 2. Epithelial tissue and connective tissue we really don't visit again in the book, so we're going to spend more time on those 2. Think of epithelial tissue as coverings. Connective tissue are things that support or connect. Muscle tissue is for movement, and nervous tissue is for responsiveness for responding to stimuli. Okay, so we'll go through epithelial tissue first. So the location, so we're talking about your skin, body coverings, but also things like body linings. So the membranes that might line the inside of, say, your abdominal cavity, membranes that might line your organs, like the pericardium, lines your heart, or glandular tissue, glands that produce things like hormones. The functions of epithelial tissues will be for protection. Again, think like your skin. Absorption, infiltration, and secretion. So oftentimes these membranes, think about like your mucous membranes. If you produce mucus, that's like a secretion. Your lungs are a membrane that absorbs oxygen. Filtration, things like your kidneys filter your blood. So absorption, filtration, and secretion are things that membranes can do besides just protecting. They might be absorbing something or secreting something out. So the characteristics of epithelial tissues, so oftentimes you have groups of cells that fit very closely together or form sheets. Think about like if you're building a protective brick wall, you're going to have many different layers of bricks for protection. The general scheme here, the apical surface, so the apex is the top of something. The apical surface is the free surface. Of your skin, the apical surface would be what touches the air, or what's on the outside. The lower surface, which is called, or the lower surface of the tissue, rests on what's called a basement membrane. So think about like you built a brick wall. The bottom layer of bricks is the lower surface that rests on the ground. That's analogous to the basement membrane. And the top row of bricks, what's on the top of the brick fence or the brick wall, would be the apical surface. They are avascular. Vascular refers to transport. And in your body, vascular tissues refer to like your cardiovascular system, your blood vessels. Avascular means you don't have blood vessels. So epithelial tissues are generally avascular. They don't have a blood supply. If you shave, in the morning, you don't automatically bleed. You can shave the outer surface of your skin without bleeding. If you bleed, you're actually cutting deeper into the skin. They also regenerate pretty easily as long as the tissues are healthy and well nourished. So the way that you classify epithelial tissues, there's 2 main things you look at. First, you look at the number of cell layers. If it's a 1 cell layer thick membrane, just 1 cell layer, that's called a simple membrane. You can look at the picture here. If you have more than 1 layer, it's called a stratified membrane. So this is simple and this is stratified. You can categorize all epithelial tissues into whether or not they are simple or stratified. Okay, that's one way to classify. The second way is by the shape of the cells. Squamous or squamous, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I usually say squamous. Squamous cells are flattened, kind of like tiles. Cuboidal cells are shaped like cubes. That's not shocking. And columnar cells are shaped like columns. So there's 2 classification schemes. There's by the number of layers and there's by the shape. So based upon these, if you pair any 2 of them together, there's really 6 ways you can do this. For example, you could have simple squamous, you could have stratified squamous, you could have simple columnar, you could have stratified columnar. There's really 6 different combinations, and we're going to go through those right now. So simple squamous, so simple means it's 1 layer. Squamous means that they're flat. So this is a single layer of very flat cells. Um, if you think about it, you know, a barrier that's only one cell thick and those cells are thin, that's not a particularly great barrier for protection. It might be a pretty flimsy membrane, but it might be a good membrane if you want to like get things through the membrane. Things that might line your body cavities, or think about like your lungs. Your lungs are meant to diffuse oxygen, into your bloodstream and get CO2 out. If that was a membrane that was like a million cells thick, it would be hard to get stuff through it. So think about like a screened-in porch. A screened-in porch, the screen is a membrane or it is a barrier. It does keep bugs out. It keeps things out. It keeps things in. But it's a very porous barrier, so things can go through it pretty easily. So functions like diffusion, getting things in, filtering things out of the screen can be a great filter. Secreting things out. A simple squamous membrane would be good for things like that. Not good for protection, particularly. Of course, it's better than nothing, but protection isn't one of the functions here, right? Here you have a picture, the alveoli of your lungs. These are air sacs. We'll discuss this when we do your respiratory system. These air sacs are full of air, obviously, and this one cell thick membrane that surrounds them allows O2 to go into your blood or CO2 to go out of your blood to go back into your lungs so you can exhale it. Simple cuboidal would be a single layer of cube-shaped cells. Like the previous example, like simple squamous, but the cells are a little bit thicker, they're cube-shaped. These are common in glands and their ducts. So a duct, so picture a gland, like your adrenal glands, and a duct would be like a little tube coming off the duct. You find or coming off the gland rather. You find these in the walls of kidney tubules or ureters. The membranes covering the ovaries are also this kind. This, like the previous kind, it mainly functions in secretion and absorption. Sometimes these cells can be ciliated, little cilia, little like tail-like appendages, which can beat back and forth. You might find those in your respiratory system. They help propel things through the system. In the female reproductive system, sometimes you have tubules that are ciliated that help propel egg or sperm. Here you have a picture. What is this? This is showing the cells of your kidney tubules. You can see they're cuboidal shaped. Simple columnar would be a single layer of column-shaped cells. Similar idea. The functions are going to be secretion, absorption. Some can be ciliated. Sometimes these, because these are thicker, right, might have these cells called goblet cells. Goblet cells produce mucus. So if you're talking about lining, your digestive tract, you have these goblet cells that produce mucus, which are secreted into your digestive tract. This diagram right here, you can see here's a single layer of these columnar-shaped cells. Here you see a goblet cell that's producing, in this case, mucus, which is going to be secreted out of the membrane. Pseudostratified columnar. So pseudo means false. So it looks like it's a single. Actually, it is a single layer. Sometimes it looks like it's more than one layer because the cells can be different sizes. Some are short, some are taller. So it looks like it might be more than one layer, but it's really just one layer. They all rest on that basement membrane. You find these often in your respiratory tract where they can be ciliated, have little cilia, and they function again in absorption or secretion. Here I have a picture. These are the ones in your, your trachea, and you can see I have these cells that are ciliated. See the cilia? And it looks like it's more than one cell layer, but it's actually just one. Some of them are just shorter than others. Stratified squamous. So now we're getting into things that are stratified, so more than one layer. So this would be a case, so in this case, they're squamous because the top layer, the cells are flattened, like the squamous shape. Having many different layers stacked would be very good for protection. Think like your skin, think areas where you have lots of abrasion or lots of friction. Your skin, your mouth, your esophagus, you want many layers because the layers tend to die and get sloughed off. Here I have a picture. This is showing your skin. Look at all the different layers here. This is stratified, and they're squamous because they're like flattened tiles. Here's the apical surface. Here's the basement membrane, and you have all these layers. Stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar, having many layers of cuboidal cells or columnar cells, is not that common. They're found sometimes in ducts of your larger glands. In humans, again, you don't see them that much, which is why I'm only going to mention these on this one slide. You should just know what they are. and the fact that they're pretty rare. Transitional epithelium. So this is a case where you have modified stratified squamous epithelium, and these are cells that can stretch. And think about an organ, like look at the last line, think about an organ like your bladder. Your bladder is an organ that can stretch, same with the uterus if a woman's pregnant, or you know, the bladder can stretch pretty large. You know, if you got to go, your bladder has been stretched. So these are cells that are stratified, they're transitional, and they can stretch to be larger. And these would be organs, you know, that you want to be able to stretch and then return to the normal shape. You know, after you go to the bathroom, your bladder goes back to its normal shape. So transitional epithelium are cells like the bladder or the uterus that are stretchy. This is showing cells of your bladder, and you can see that it's transitional. The size sort of changes, and you can see there's more than one layer. So glands, we're going to come back to glands when we do the endocrine system. So glands are just, you know, are tissues that secrete things. Usually they secrete different proteins in like a water-based fluid. It could be hormones, things like that. The two types of glands, and we're going to come back to this later, are endocrine glands and exocrine glands. So endocrine glands are ductless. Remember, ducts are little like tubules that might come off an organ. Endocrine glands, like your adrenal glands, they secrete hormones directly into your blood. There's no like tube that the hormones go through. Exocrine glands have ducts, they have tubes, and they empty their secretions onto your skin. These are things like sweat glands and oil glands where you have actual ducts. So endocrine glands produce hormones, no ducts. Exocrine glands produce sweat or oil in your skin, and they do have ducts. More on that later. Okay, so that's all for epithelial tissues. Connective tissues, these are tissues, they're found everywhere in your body. They're the most abundant tissues in your body. They connect things, they bind tissues together, think ligaments or tendons. They support your body, and they provide protection. So some of these are pretty well vascularized. Some have, I mean, one example is blood. Blood is a connective tissue, which is obviously very highly vascularized because that's blood. Some have a poor blood supply, like cartilage. Cartilage doesn't have a big blood supply. They're avascular. The term extracellular matrix, that's a fancy term. So the general scheme here is that you have cells that are embedded in some kind of matrix, all right? And the matrix, you know, extracellular means they're outside the cell. The cells that are in the matrix secrete the matrix. So think about something like bone. The extracellular matrix of bone is a calcified, you know, pretty hard substance. Inside your bones, embedded in your bones, are cells called osteocytes that produce the tissue or the material that makes up bone. So for each of these, there's some kind of cell, and there's some kind of extracellular matrix that the cell produces and that the cells are embedded in. That's the general scheme here. There's two main elements of the extracellular matrix. So the ground substance is water, different polysaccharides that help stick things together. The second part are called fibers. Fibers are produced by these cells. The three main types of fibers, so collagen, which are called white fibers, are good for support and protection. Elastic fibers, which are called yellow fibers, are stretchy. And the third kind are called reticular fibers. I'm not going to go into what those are. You should just know that the three types of fibers are collagen, elastic, and reticular. So now we're going to go through the types of connective tissue. There's a bunch of these. We're going to go from the ones that are the most like supportive, the ones that are hardest, the ones that are toughest, and we're going to end with blood, which is obviously not very tough. It's a fluid largely. So the toughest is bone, which is called osseous tissue. So the scheme here, you have bone cells called osteocytes, which are in little gaps, little spaces called lacunae. The matrix, which is produced by the bone cells, consists of calcium salts, and it's a very bones are hard. And there's also lots of collagen fibers with bones that help give it strength. And the function here would be to protect and support your body. If you look at this picture, so this is a drawing, this is an actual microscope image. So these little black things like here, these are the bone cells. and they're embedded in these lacunae right here, these little like gaps. And notice that you kind of have this like pattern of concentric circles, almost like tubes, and these tubes like come out of the slide. This is sort of like a cross section. And these, again, these little black cells are embedded inside this tissue. The next type is called hyaline cartilage. There's a couple different types of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most common type. It has a very rubbery matrix, lots of collagen fibers, very supportive. Locations, this is what's like in your larynx and your voice box. You can kind of feel it if you do that number. It's in your rib cage, the cartilage of your rib cage. It is, you know, a little bit stretchy, maybe. You know, your ribs can obviously expand when you breathe, but it's pretty good. It's pretty supportive, is what I'm trying to say. The entire fetal skeleton, when you're growing as a fetus, is made of hyaline cartilage. By the time the baby is born, most of it's been converted into bone, with the exception of parts in the skull. You've probably felt soft spots on babies' heads. It's kind of creepy, to be honest. For the baby to get through the birth canal, when it's born, you need the head to be able to kind of like smush. You kind of get a cone head when babies are born. After a year or two, the head is hardened into all bone. Here you have a picture. The cells that produce cartilage are called chondrocytes, and you can see they're embedded inside this rubbery matrix. Elastic cartilage is more stretchy than hyaline cartilage. This is what's like in your ear, the end of your nose. Fibrocartilage is the kind of cartilage, it's smushy. It's found between vertebra of your backbone. You know, if you slip a disc in your back, it's because the vertebra have been loosened or jostled from where they're supposed to be. Your backbone is stretchy, you know, you can, or it's not stretchy, it's flexible, it's bendable. You can do that number because the discs have this fibrocartilage between them. Here again, we see chondrocytes and the lacunae with collagen fibers. This is the case with the disc in your backbone, or the cartilage between the discs of your backbone, I should say. Dense connective tissue, collagen fibers is mainly what's in the matrix, the extracellular matrix. Fibroblasts are the cells that produce these fibers. There's three main types. There are tendons. Tendons attach muscles to bones. Ligaments attach bones to bones at joints, and the dermis is the bottom layer of your skin. You know, your skin is epithelial tissue, but the very bottom layer is connective tissue. You know, they're called dense because they're pretty sturdy. If you've ever eaten, you know, a chicken leg and you get a tendon, you know what that feels like. It's very, you know, you wouldn't want to be chewing it. Here I have a picture. Here I have the fibroblasts, these cells embedded in the collagen fibers. And again, the cells produce the fibers. Loose connective tissue, there are several types. Areolar tissue, so throughout your body, you have this sort of like cobwebby connective tissue. It's soft, it's stretchy, and it can absorb lots of water or lots of fluids. This areolar tissue, again, it's sort of like a cobweb. It's good for suspending things in your body. It's good for like packaging. It also soaks up lots of fluid. And edema, this last word on the slide, edema is basically a fancy word for a swelling. If you have tissues that swell, they're filling with water. It's this areolar tissue that's this cobwebby tissue that soaks up all the water, and you get like a swelling. You know, you can see it through the skin. Here you see a picture of the fibroblast and the loose connective tissue with all these collagen fibers. This looks a little bit less dense than the previous couple images. And again, you can imagine how this cobwebby tissue could absorb lots of water. Adipose tissue is a fancy word for fat. Adipose tissue, the matrix, again, is sort of like areolar tissue, but you have these fat globules. You know, it's fat. You gain more of it when you eat more calories than you burn off. The functions, it's insulation. It can help cushion internal organs. And again, the last point here, it serves as fuel storage. That's a fancy way of saying, you know, if you eat a lot and don't burn off the calories, you store it. To burn it off, you'd have to burn off the adipose tissue. Here you have a picture. This is showing breast tissue. So here I have it looks almost like a signet ring. You have the the cells, and this is a big, globule of fat. This is adipose tissue. Reticular connective tissue, the main examples here, so when we talk about your lymphatic system, lymphatic tissues, lymph nodes, this relates to your spleen and your bone marrow. This is sort of like a very delicate network of interwoven fibers. They're also important in your immune system. More about these tissues when we do the lymphatic system and the immune system. Just know that they're found in lymph nodes, your spleen, and bone marrow. Here you have your spleen. You can see, this is a complicated picture. You can see you have reticular cells like that one. You have white blood cells, and you have these fibers. Like that's a white blood cell right there. All right, the sort of purplish things are the reticular cells, and the sort of bluish things are the white blood cells. You can see the fibers. Lastly, blood, which is a vascular tissue, because vascular means you have a blood supply. There's a whole chapter on blood that we'll get to later. The extracellular matrix is called plasma. Blood plasma is the liquid part of your blood. There's a cellular part that contains red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Platelets are fibers that help blood to clot if you have a wound. Obviously, the function here would be transporting things through your body. Here you just see white blood cells, red blood cells. Again, there's a whole chapter on blood later. Okay, so that's all for epithelial and connective. So muscle tissue, we're just going to go through this briefly because there's a whole chapter on the muscles later. Muscle tissue is to produce movement, right? There's three types. There's skeletal muscle, there's cardiac muscle, and there's smooth muscle. Okay, let's go through each one quickly. So skeletal muscle, voluntary control means you can control it. So if I want to walk, I can physically control that. You don't have to tell your heart to beat. Your heart is an involuntary muscle. Your biceps are a voluntary muscle. Now, sometimes you can get reflexes, you can get like twitches, which are involuntary, but because I can control skeletal muscles, we call them voluntary. Contracting them, moves your bones or your skin. Facial movements, gross body movements. The characteristics of skeletal muscles, so they're striated, which means they have stripes. I'll show you a picture in a minute. They're multinucleate, which means they have more than one nucleus, which is kind of weird. Most cells only have one nucleus, right? Muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells have more than one nucleus. And they're long cylindrical cells, which means they're long and they're skinny. Here's a picture. This is a drawing. Here's an actual microscope image. You can see they have these like striped appearance. They're long fibers. And here you can see there's multiple nuclei per cell. Okay, cardiac muscle is involuntary. This is only found in your heart. You don't have to think for your heart to pump. The function is to pump blood. The characteristics here, they're striated, they have stripes. There's only one nucleus per cell. And cells are attached to one another through these structures called intercalated discs. Let me show you a quick image. So here you can see there are stripes. These discs right here, these intercalated discs, the discs have little gaps in them. And basically at these discs, it's a way for heart cells to communicate with one another pretty quickly. Things can go from one cell to another without having to leave the cell. They can go through gap junctions in the discs. And because the cells can swap out cytoplasms or things in the cytoplasm, they can communicate much faster than other muscle cells can. Obviously, your heart has to function, rhythmically and steadily for, 70 beats a minute for, I don't know, say 80 or 90 years. So the cells being able to communicate well is very, very important. The last kind is called smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is also involuntary. You don't have to think about it. This would be muscles found like lining your stomach, the uterus, blood vessels. The characteristics are they're not striated. That's why they're called smooth, because there are, you don't have the stripes. There's one nucleus per cell. They're spindle shaped, which means they're long and they're tapered. They come to an end like a spindle. Think like Sleeping Beauty poking her finger on the spindle. Here's a picture. This is showing some muscles lining your digestive system. You can see there's no stripes. They look smooth. They're long and tapered, and there's only one nucleus per cell. So nervous tissue, there's a whole chapter on the nervous system later. We're just going to briefly mention this one because we're going to come back to it big time later. They're composed of cells called neurons. and cells that support neurons and help keep them alive. The function here is irritability and conductivity. So they're able to like detect signals. That's what irritability means. And they're able to send signals. That's what conductivity means. The support cells are things called neuroglia. The word actually means nerve glue. They insulate neurons, they protect them, and they support them. Here you just see an image. Again, we're going to come back to this in way more detail much later. Nerve cells usually have a cell body like this, and these long sort of wire-like things that come off called axons. This is showing your brain. Okay, so that's all we're going to say about nervous tissue because we'll come back to it. This is a picture from the end of the chapter that just shows all 4 tissues. It's a good summary. It says what they are, it says what they're doing, and gives example. Okay, that's chapter 3. Hope that was helpful, and I will see you guys next time.